would like us I would like to read our scripture now. We're reading from Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that moment. Drew.
Well, good morning. It's such an honor to be with you all this morning in Boise, Idaho. I want to thank you for this invitation to be here, and especially to Julie for her visionary leadership for making the workshops yesterday happen. By way of further introduction, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and spent my summers at a family cabin in North Idaho at Priest Lake, one of the best places on planet Earth. I'm a little biased though. On my dad's side of my family, I come from a family of dairy farmers in Nampa, Idaho. And so it's just very special for me to be back in this space with you all. I haven't been through Boise for 20 years since I was on my honeymoon with my wife. We drove through here to get to Sun Valley, Idaho. I was very grateful for this opportunity to be with you all today. The topic of Christian nationalism is a personal one for me, and I'm guessing that it might be a personal one for many of you as well. For some of you, maybe you have family members, friends, or neighbors who've been radicalized on social media over the past decade by misinformation and conspiracy theories. For others, maybe you feel the personal nature of this topic as you sense the immediate threat that Christian nationalism presents to democracy, the church's public witness, and the vulnerable in the United States. No matter where you sit on this topic, I want to be clear about one thing this morning. You are a beloved child of God, created in God's image. It is my hope and prayer that each of us can lean into this good news this morning as we revisit our loyalties and think carefully about how we love our neighbors as children of God. Since 2015, scholars and pundits of all sorts have debated how and whether to apply the term fascism to the US's growing movement of white Christian nationalism and its ultra-nationalist politics in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. While we cannot settle that debate this morning, one cannot deny that reality for all Americans has become distorted by and entangled in various forms of what we call fascist politics. This includes the polarization and division of Americans through right-wing appeals to a mythic past, propaganda, anti-intellectualism, unreality, hierarchy, victimhood, law and order, sexual anxiety, appeals to the heartland, and a dismantling of public welfare and unity. These 10 mechanisms of fascist politics, according to philosopher Jason Stanley, are interconnected and build on one another to normalize and transform the morally extraordinary into the ordinary. The past 10 years have felt exhausting as division and the morally extraordinary become ordinary. As Stanley argues, the most telling symptom of fascist politics is division. To illustrate this, 1 year ago, at an upscale retirement community in San Francisco, 2 of its female residents engaged in a fistfight on the pickleball court over the presidential election. Eyewitnesses report that the elderly women left one another's hair on the court. You can't make this stuff up. On the day of this altercation, it just so happened that I was lecturing on Christian nationalism at another retirement community with over 700 residents on the East Coast. When I arrived, I was shocked to learn that this community was a microcosm of our country's polarization. For a full day, I sat with residents who shared stories of fractured relationships and about neighbors who had been radicalized on social media. The community's executives even sat me down before my lectures to make sure that I wasn't there to further divide the community. This retirement community even had to put a moratorium on placing political signs outside people's apartments, and no one is allowed to wear political t-shirts or political hats. My Mennonite hosts got around this policy by wearing jackets over their Black Lives Matter t-shirts, and every time we stepped outside, they took those jackets off. That was to my great amusement. But for full disclosure, I did not grow up in the historic Peace Church tradition. In my family nucleus, pledging allegiance to God and country were sacred things to do. In fact, I'm confident that I would have created more conflict in my family by questioning the integrity of the U.S. military than the divinity of Christ. Like millions of my fellow Americans, I was taught from a young age that pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States of America was a sacred and perhaps even Christian thing to do. It wasn't until the terror attacks on 9/11 that my identity as a Christian began to diverge from uncritical nationalism. What I remember most vividly is the morning of March 20th, 2003, when America preemptively lit the skies with its military might to crush the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq through its shock and awe campaign. Even thousands of miles away, the shock and awe felt real as news anchors strapped on military gear to ride in tanks and film the spectacle. I watched from my evangelical youth pastor's house where, to my disbelief, my beloved pastor and closest Christian friends cheered with joy as the Iraqi night sky lit up with balls of fire, sparks, and smoke, signaling the death of strangers beneath the rubble. The celebrated spectacle led to the mutilation of over 200,000 innocent civilians, including entire Chaldean Christian communities. I come back to this moment often in my research as a New Testament professor. For the next 2 years, I reread the Gospels with an eye toward what the teachings of Jesus mean for life in this world rather than exclusively in the world to come. As I dug deeper into, backing up here, this ultimately led me to Anabaptism and Living Water Community Church in Chicago, which is a part of MCUSA. As I dug deeper into my newfound Anabaptist faith, I was delighted to learn that Jesus is the center of gravity among Anabaptists. This also means that the teachings of Jesus matter for our ethics, including questions of war, oppression, and neighborly love. This emphasis on following Jesus in the here and now is important because, as I learned the hard way, not all Christians believe that the teachings of Jesus are authoritative for life in this world. Some Christians think that Jesus' teaching is only meant as a spiritual, inward disposition rather than an embodied way of life. Others suggest that Jesus' teaching is really meant for just priests and pastors. Martin Luther, the famous reformer, argued that Jesus' teaching is meant to make us feel guilty for our sin. He said, quote unquote, "It is an impossible ideal." The famous New Testament scholar in the 20th century, Albert Schweitzer, argued that Jesus' teaching was an interim ethic for a failed Jewish Messiah. And fundamentalist American evangelicals argued that Jesus' teaching is a blueprint for heaven and is only meant to be lived out in the afterlife. I don't share any of this to toot our Anabaptist horn. I get it. The teachings of Jesus are jarring, disorienting, and hard. Many early Anabaptists, in fact, were persecuted to the point of death for giving loyalty to the way of Jesus over state power. This is one of the distinctives of a Mennonite view of the Bible. We center Jesus' teachings, including the Sermon on the Mount, for envisioning Christian discipleship. Yet the Bible, including the New Testament, is full of troubling texts, or what some call texts of terror. Sometimes these texts leave us scratching our heads as we search for meaning. Other texts leave us profoundly disturbed by their violent, misogynistic, and even dehumanizing characters. The Bible is not an easy book, nor is it easily domesticated to fit into our modern cultural sensibilities. One of the most troubling texts in the New Testament comes from the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is confronted by a Canaanite woman whose daughter is being violently tormented by a demon. The text troubles because up to this point in Matthew's gospel, Jesus teaches and demonstrates radical neighborly love including love toward enemies. One would think that when confronted by that Canaanite woman, who was a historic ethnic enemy of Israel, that Jesus would put his money where his mouth is and embrace her in her moment of need. But Jesus doesn't do that. Even after the woman shouts, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David," Jesus gives her the silent treatment, and Matthew tells us that Jesus did not answer her at all. To make matters even worse, the disciples rebuke the woman's audacity to approach Jesus, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." Nevertheless, she persists in faith and kneels before Jesus, pleading, "Lord, help me." In the phrase, "Lord, help me," we hear the desperation of a mother in distress, the cries of a vulnerable mom willing to risk everything for her daughter. How will the neighbor and enemy-loving Jesus respond? Jesus' response to the woman's moment of need not only surprises, but shocks. Instead of embracing her need, Jesus stays focused on his mission to Israel by reminding the woman of her subordinate place among Gentiles in God's cosmic hierarchy. But Jesus takes this thinking even further. He says, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." The passage is one of the most disturbing in the Gospels. It implies that Jesus thought of the woman and her Gentile family as subhuman creatures or as dogs. Here it is crucial for us to recognize that Jesus doesn't directly call the woman a dog. Rather, he implicitly implies that all Gentiles are dogs. This is a textbook example of what scholars of dehumanization call psychological essentialism, which is the idea that entire ethnic groups can be essentialized with a particular essence or characteristics that make them not only less than human, but subhuman. We know from history that bad things happen when people start thinking about other humans as subhuman creatures. In fact, animal slurs often precede direct violence, oppression, and even genocide. So Germans essentialized Jews' essence as rats in the months and years leading up to the Holocaust. Hutus essentialized Tutsis' essence as cockroaches in the months leading up to genocide. More recently, Ethiopian evangelical president Abiy Ahmed essentialized Tigrayans as hyenas and weeds in the months leading up to genocide. And Zionists essentialized Palestinians as animals in the years leading up to genocide in Gaza. In the context of the United States, we're living in a moment of ever-growing fascist politics and violence toward immigrants, aided and abated by politicians and their followers who animalize immigrants to create the conditions for direct violence, cultural violence, and deportation. I'll spare you all the details in this sermon, but during my sabbatical, I cataloged every time a far-right American politician used a dehumanizing animal slur over the past decade, and the results were disturbing, to put it mildly. Here, I wish to draw attention to one example, but first, I want to acknowledge that it's not lost on me that there is an idea out there that Christian leaders are not supposed to talk about politicians by name from the pulpit or show partisan bias. I understand these dynamics well, but we are not living in normal times, and I think Christian leaders are called to be truth tellers in the face of fascism's threats to human flourishing and the church's public witness. So I want to be honest this morning and acknowledge that I am biased. And my bias is this: I believe that the life and teachings of Jesus are incompatible with white Christian nationalism and its permission structure that creates the conditions for the dehumanization of our immigrant neighbors. At several political rallies during his 2016 presidential campaign, the leader of our current administration, or who I will refer to in this sermon as Mr. President, did a dramatic reading from the lyrics of a song called "The Snake." As one rally goer put it, it was like story time with Mr. President. This was no ordinary children's story time, though, as Mr. President built up to the reading with anti-immigrant rhetoric against Syrian and Mexican immigrants. After whipping up his audience's fears, Mr. President read "The Snake" out loud, a story of a tender-hearted woman who shows empathy to a half-frozen snake on the side of the road. The snake says, "Take me in, O tender woman, take me in for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman," sighed the snake. The woman obliges, and after warming the snake up in her home, she strokes his skin, holds him tight, but the venomous snake proceeds to bite her. The lyrics provided Mr. President with a kind of elusive allegory. The generous woman represents relaxed immigration policy. The snake represents poisonous immigrants. To loud cheers, Mr. President amplified the innuendo. He said, "Does that make sense to anybody? Does that make any sense? We have no idea who we are taking in, and we better be careful." Ironically, The Snake was written by Oscar Brown, who was a member of the Communist Party, a Black nationalist, and a civil rights activist. One of Brown's daughters likened Mr. President's reappropriation of her father's song to a lynching scene. Even after Brown's daughter sent a cease and desist letter, Mr. President proceeded to read The Snake at a rally to mark his 100th day in office. Together, these animal metaphors contributed to trickle-down bigotry and the largest spike in hate crime since the 9/11 terror attacks. Notably, surges in crime were felt the most in counties where Mr. President held a political rally. Dangerous speech in American far-right politics can even cultivate what psychologists call moral disengagement among consumers of animalistic dehumanization. To be sure, in August of 2019, a 21-year-old white man and self-proclaimed Christian, according to his Twitter bio, drove 10 hours to El Paso, Texas, and murdered 20 people inside a Walmart with an AR-15. Minutes before the terror attack, the shooter posted a 2,300 hate-filled manifesto that mirrors Mr. President's dehumanizing rhetoric. He wrote, quote, "This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas." Friends, trickle-down bigotry is deadly. According to the Public Religion Research Institute, this anti-immigrant sentiment is especially present among white Christians. In fact, 81% of white adherents of Christian nationalism believe that immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic backgrounds. We call this conspiracy theory replacement theory, and catch this. At this moment, 165 members of the United States Congress have shown public sympathy for replacement theory. With this background in mind, I want to be crystal clear about one thing this morning. Animal metaphors are like pouring gasoline on ethnic enmity. Scholars of dehumanization suggest that they have an uncanny ability to hijack our moral inhibitions that hold us back from killing one another. This latter point is worth pausing to reflect on. By default, it's not easy for humans to kill one another. As a Christian and a pastor, I believe that's because we all carry God's divine image within our bodies. This point is well illustrated in a 1947 book called Men Against Fire, written by a historian named General Slam Marshall. Marshall was a veteran of World War I and a combat historian of World War II, and as an eyewitness of killing in war, he writes that the average and normally healthy individual, the man who can endure the mental and physical stresses of combat, still has such an inner and usually unrealized resistance to killing a fellow human that he will not of his own volition take life if it is possible to turn away from that responsibility. Now hear this. At the vital point, he becomes a conscientious objector, unknowing. Marshall's observation of soldiers' God-given inhibition to kill in war illustrates how hard it is for us to harm strangers and why dehumanizing a perceived enemy is a necessary precondition for making killing easier. The danger for us today is to assume that Jesus' use of an animal slur represents the thinking of all Jews during his time toward Gentiles. Many scholars and pastors have made this case throughout history, with the consequence of painting Judaism into a corner as an ethnocentric, racist, and misogynistic religion over against Christianity's supposedly more inclusive outlook. We call this Christian anti-Judaism. Recent scholarship, however, suggests that we have no evidence that Jews of Jesus' time thought of Gentiles as dogs. Jesus' use of an animal metaphor, therefore, is a Matthean Jesus problem and not a Jewish one in the objective sense. And so what do we do with Jesus' seeming lapse in ethical judgment? Thankfully, a big thankfully here, the story doesn't end with Jesus essentializing animal slur. The woman continues to push Jesus on the boundaries of his messianic mission, reminding him that even the dogs eat crumbs from their master's feet. The saying is troubling, to put it mildly, and calls to mind oppressive hierarchies of power, along with the dangers of pitting religious in-groups over against religious outgroups. But the woman's response influences Jesus. In fact, this is the only place in the Gospels where Jesus is bested in an argument. The irony is that Jesus is bested not by elite scripture scholars, but by a Gentile woman and a historic ethnic enemy of Israel. The Canaanite woman teaches Israel's Messiah something about inclusion in God's family, and he listens and responds by healing her daughter. In this way, the woman becomes the hero of the story and the exemplar of faith. As New Testament scholar Jamie Clark Soules argues, by the end of this story, this woman has taught Jesus a lesson about his own identity and mission that even he himself didn't know, let alone his ill-mannered disciples. That his mission was broader than he had realized. Her grit and wit literally saved her and her daughter. She is the only hero in the story. You might even say that she is a proto-feminist. The Canaanite woman in Matthew's gospel gives us permission to confront God incarnate boldly and to ask God boldly on behalf of the vulnerable. She also gives us permission to confront dehumanizers, to remind the watching world that even outsiders carry God's divine image and are of inestimable worth in the economy of God's kingdom. You see, all humans are capable of dehumanizing others, including me, and all dehumanizers can change their minds, including Jesus. But as we negotiate this moment of ever-growing fascist politics and Christian nationalism, it is crucial for us to recognize that dehumanizing the dehumanizer has the obverse effect of dehumanizing oneself. As Paulo Freire writes, as oppressors dehumanize others and violate their rights, they themselves also become dehumanized. The Canaanite woman offers us a paradigm for nonviolent resistance. Instead of retaliating by dehumanizing Jesus, she protests nonviolently, reminding Israel's Messiah that even ethnic enemies carry God's divine image within them and are worthy of God's love and benefaction. Brothers and sisters, family of God, may we find the courage to imitate the Canaanite woman's faith, to boldly confront God, to intervene on behalf of the dehumanized, and may dehumanizers find a paradigm in the boundary-crossing Jesus of someone who changes their mind about belonging, ethnic enmity, and the extent of God's love. Before I close, I want to ask you to put your hands over your heart and repeat after me. My life, in my body, in my neighbor's life, in my neighbor's body, carry God's image. I am of inestimable worth to God. In my neighbor's life is of inestimable worth to God. Amen.